My door was locked, but something got in anyway. I never thought this would happen to me. I'm not a nervous person. I don't jump at shadows or get startled very easily. I can watch horror movies right before bed without having any issues sleeping. I don't think it's because I'm a guy, though. I think it's just because I've never had anything bad happen to me. I've always been a very lucky person. The first time I ever saw a ghost was when I was about 17 years old, and I was working for my uncle who owned a motel. I remember it vividly, because I didn't believe in ghosts until that moment. It was one of those hot summer nights where you can hear cicadas buzzing everywhere. I was getting ready to lock up for the night. The guests were all in their rooms, and I turned off all the lobby lights except for the one above the front desk. I checked the security cameras to make sure no one was outside, and then I went out back to lock the sliding glass doors. As I turned off the engine and walked around the building, I kept hearing footsteps. At first, I thought it was a guest returning from a late-night smoke break, or maybe an animal. I dismissed it and continued to walk. The footsteps followed me. They were coming from inside the building, which was impossible since all the guests were accounted for. This is when I started to get freaked out, stopped dead in my tracks and listened intently. The footsteps stopped, called out and asked if anyone was there. No reply. Then I heard movement again. The footsteps started up again. Thinking that it was probably some kind of trick, I grabbed a broom that was leaning against the wall and started to investigate. I looked under the beds, in the closets, behind the curtains, and even in between the stacked-up chairs. I didn't find anything or anyone until I went into the last room at the end of the hall. I pushed open the door and screamed. The sheets were bunched up on the bed like someone had been laying in it just moments before. I ran out of the room and didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. To this day, I don't know what those footsteps were, or why the sheets were messed up in that room. After that night, I became a believer in ghosts. And so, when I moved into my new apartment, I made sure to check each room thoroughly before going to bed. That way, if there was anything in there, I could have a conversation with it so we could hopefully become friends. I didn't want to be rude. The apartment was beautiful and spacious with high ceilings and big windows. It had a master bedroom, second bedroom, and a den. The den was strange because it didn't have a window and the walls were covered with sound-dampening foam. I never really figured out what that room was used for previously, but I didn't spend too much time thinking about it. It didn't matter to me because I was gone, turn it into my office and gaming room. It took me a few weeks to move everything in and get set up, but finally I was done. I moved in on a Friday afternoon, and by Sunday I had the room exactly how I wanted it. The only thing left to do was to sleep in my new bed for the first time. I was tired from the long weekend of moving, so I didn't bother checking anything. I changed into my pajamas and got right into bed. It was one of those really comfortable beds that you sink right into. I was watching TV and laying on my side when suddenly I heard footsteps near my bed. I told myself that it was probably just my imagination, because it was very likely that my neighbors were home, and they had a baby that liked to run around their apartment. So I just laid there and waited to hear them stop walking. But instead of the footsteps stopping, they started to come closer. I tried to ignore them, but they were getting louder. And when the footsteps stopped, I heard dragging metal moans. I rolled over on my back and saw my bed frame slowly moving towards me. It was like it was being pulled by some kind of magnet. I panicked and tried to get out of bed, but the entire bed was sucked into the corner of the room. I couldn't get out. Then out of nowhere, a scratching noise came from under my bed. Whatever was underneath started to move towards me. I had no other option, so I climbed out the window and onto the fire escape. It was very high up, but I managed to shimmy to the next window and climb in. It was the den. I was shaking uncontrollably and trying to catch my breath. Then I noticed that the room was filled with fog. It was coming from everywhere, but it was thick enough to put its hands through. I watched in terror as it reached towards me with these long gray fingers. I don't know why, but I wasn't scared of being touched by it. So I reached out and grabbed one of its fingers. It was freezing cold. It pulled me closer and whispered, "Get out of here." It sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Even though I understood the words, they didn't make any sense. Why was it telling me to leave? I didn't answer. I just stared at it blankly while it dragged me towards the door. We walked down the hallway, and it opened my bedroom door with its other hand. I stopped and asked, "Why are you showing me this?" Still, it didn't answer, but it kept pulling me forward. I felt a strong force, and I fell to my knees. I looked back and it was gone. The bed was also gone. In its place was a huge gaping hole in the wall, like an open doorway. I felt this urge to crawl through the hole and see where it led. As I reached for it, a voice echoed through the room. It said, "Don't go through." I froze. I knew that voice. It was mine. Somehow it sounded like it was coming from another dimension. Whatever was trying to help me didn't want me to go through the portal. But what did it mean? What was on the other side? So many questions ran through my mind, but I knew I had to make a choice. Either go through the portal or leave the apartment. I chose to leave. I couldn't take the risk of whatever was on the other side finding me. I packed up all my stuff and moved out the next day. I haven't been back since. And although it's been years, sometimes I still wonder what was on the other side of the portal.